There is a moment in every conflict when the assumptions everyone built their strategy on collapse in real time, and you can actually feel the ground shift. That moment happened this week. Because for the first time in the history of the modern Middle East, the defense system that was supposed to make Israel untouchable just got punched through. Not grazed, not tested, punched through. Missiles landing inside Israeli territory, verified explosions on the ground. Footage so unmistakable that no amount of official messaging can spin it away. And if you think that is just Israel's problem, I need you to understand something. The shockwave from what happened over those skies does not stop at the Israeli border. It rolls through the Strait of Hormuz, through global oil markets, through NATO alliance politics, through your gas station, and straight into the living rooms of people who have never thought about the Middle East for a single second in their lives. This is the week everything changed. Let me show you why. Meanwhile, please leave your questions or comments in the comment section. I will answer each one individually as time permits. Also, I would be very happy if you liked the video and subscribe to my channel. Now, let's continue. To understand what just broke, you have to understand what was supposed to hold. For a generation, Israeli military doctrine rested on a simple contract with its own people. We take the fight to the enemy. The enemy never reaches you. That was the promise. The Iron Dome was the physical embodiment of that promise, a system so effective and so publicly celebrated that it became more than a weapons platform. It became a psychological guarantee. Rockets go up, interceptions light up the sky, life goes on. That was the deal. It worked against Hamas salvos from Gaza. It worked against Hezbollah launches from Lebanon. It worked so well for so long that the entire Israeli security posture was built on the assumption that the sky above their cities would always belong to them. That assumption died this week. What Iran launched was not the telegraphed, almost ceremonial retaliation the world had grown used to. This was the largest coordinated aerial assault ever directed at Israeli territory. Waves of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones fired in volleys specifically designed to overwhelm. Saturation tactics. The kind of attack where the goal is not to sneak one warhead through, but to flood the defense grid with so many simultaneous threats that interceptors run dry before the barrage ends. And the footage tells the story the official statements have not caught up to yet. Geolocation-verified video shows not just the familiar streaks of Iron Dome interceptions, but impacts. Large detonations inside Israeli territory. Cluster munitions dispersing over populated zones. The sky over Israel did not look like the clean, controlled light show the world is used to seeing. It looked like a barrage that the defenses could not fully contain. But the shift goes deeper than volume. Intelligence reporting suggests Iran was not firing blind. These were coordinated strikes aimed at specific high-value military infrastructure. There are credible reports that Unit 8200, Israel's Signals Intelligence Nerve Center, the equivalent of the NSA, the organization responsible for much of Israel's electronic warfare and cyber dominance, was directly targeted. Think about what that means. If you take out the eyes and ears of a military apparatus, every other capability degrades. Tanks still roll, jets still fly, but without the intelligence architecture guiding them, precision disappears. A blind giant is still dangerous, but it is infinitely easier to wound. Iran's foreign minister wasted no time driving the message home, publicly mocking the Iron Dome as a roof full of holes. But the rhetoric was backed by something far more unsettling than words. In an unprecedented move, Tehran issued direct warnings not to governments, but to specific corporations. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Microsoft, ExxonMobil, Amazon Web Services. Iran claimed to possess the exact coordinates of their regional offices across the UAE, Jordan, and other Gulf states, and warned employees to evacuate. Let that sink in. This is not state versus state posturing. This is a deliberate attempt to make American corporate presence in the Gulf feel physically unsafe. If companies start pulling personnel, investment follows them out the door. If investment dries up, the Gulf states lose economic leverage. Iran is not just fighting a military campaign. It is engineering a slow-motion financial siege designed to hollow out the Western commercial footprint in the region without firing a single shot at a boardroom. And then came the response from Washington. And this is where the picture gets truly alarming. In the middle of the chaos, A statement emerged from Trump declaring that Iran's military capacity had been 100% destroyed. Total. Complete. Done. But in the very next breath, the same administration called on China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz. Stop and think about that like a strategist for 1 second. If an enemy's military is truly neutralized, you do not need an international naval coalition to secure a waterway. The world's largest navy handles a defeated adversary on its own. The call for help is the tell. What Washington is actually asking for is not firepower. It is legitimacy. It is a coalition to share the burden of keeping 20% of the world's oil supply moving through a 21-mile choke point, while a not actually defeated Iran sits on both sides of it. The world's answer was a masterclass in diplomatic hedging. France moved naval assets toward the region, but wrapped it in careful language about defensive positioning, not offensive engagement. A country protecting its economic interests without signing up for someone else's war. The United Kingdom went further in the other direction. The British Prime Minister explicitly invoked the ghost of Iraq 2003, warning against being drawn into a conflict built on shifting narratives. London is not marching in lockstep with Washington on this one, and that fracture is visible from space. China rejected the request outright. Beijing imports enormous quantities of Gulf oil and has zero interest in picking a side that could jeopardize supply. Their silence is their strategy, and it is working. Japan signaled reluctance immediately. A nation constitutionally allergic to collective military action outside self-defense is not sending warships into the Persian Gulf. That leaves the United States in a position of striking isolation. And isolation at this scale creates its own danger. When a superpower cannot assemble a coalition, history shows it tends to escalate unilaterally to demonstrate strength it can no longer project through alliances. Meanwhile, Iran is reading this diplomatic fracture like an open book, but the conflict is metastasizing well beyond the Middle East. Iran reportedly warned Ukraine directly that if Kyiv supplies drones to Israel, Ukraine becomes a legitimate target for Iranian retaliation. Read that sentence again and understand what it means for the global order. It links the Middle Eastern battlefield to the European one. If Iran begins funneling more advanced weapons to Russia in response to Ukrainian support for Israel, the war in Ukraine escalates on a completely new axis. Two conflicts that most people think of as separate suddenly become a single interconnected crisis stretching from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. North Korea is watching too. Kim Jong-un issued a carefully timed statement that Pyongyang does not seek war but will not avoid it if provoked. His sister followed with explicit warnings against U.S.-South Korean military exercises, language that was noticeably sharper than the usual boilerplate. Hours later, North Korea test-fired a salvo of missiles, none intercepted. The message is obvious. While the world stares at the Middle East, other powers are probing. They are testing whether America has the bandwidth, the resources, and the political will to manage 2 or 3 major confrontations simultaneously. The timing is not coincidental. It never is. Even Switzerland, the global symbol of neutrality for over a century, refused overflight permission for U.S. military flights this week. A small diplomatic slap on the surface, but it signals a tectonic trend underneath. The post-Cold War consensus where America leads and the world falls in line is fracturing in real time. Countries that once stayed silent are now making calculated choices, and the calculation increasingly says stay out of it. So where does this leave Israel? Trapped in the worst kind of strategic trilemma. Option 1 is to absorb the strike and accept the damage. But absorption reads as weakness to every proxy, every adversary, every fence-sitter in the region. It shatters the deterrence doctrine Israel has spent decades building. If Iran can hit you and you swallow it, Hezbollah gets bolder, Iranian proxies in Iraq get bolder, and every calculation about the cost of attacking Israel gets rewritten overnight. Option 2 is overwhelming retaliation. But a massive counterstrike risks igniting every front simultaneously, Hezbollah from Lebanon, proxies from Syria and Iraq, potentially a multi-front war that stretches the IDF past its operational limits. Option 3 is a surgical, deniable response, an attempt to climb back into the shadows. But after a public humiliation of this magnitude, shadow warfare feels like bringing a whisper to a screaming match. Every enemy is watching. Every ally is watching. The room for quiet moves has collapsed. And hovering over all three options is the economic wildcard that turns a regional crisis into a global one. If the Strait of Hormuz is perceived as too dangerous for commercial traffic, oil prices do not just spike. They detonate. Inflation that central banks have spent 2 years trying to wrestle down roars back. Energy costs in Europe and North America surge. Heating bills, fuel costs, food prices, all of it climbs because supply chains that depend on Gulf oil cannot function when tankers are afraid to move. Leaders from London to Berlin to Washington face populations demanding to know why their cost of living is exploding over a war thousands of miles away. That is the moment regional conflict becomes everyone's crisis. The most optimistic scenario is a de-escalation brokered through back channels, some version of a return to the cold equilibrium that held for years. But trust has been incinerated. The more likely path is a prolonged period of escalating exchanges, each one pushing closer to a threshold nobody can walk back from. The Iron Dome was never just a weapon system. It was a symbol, a promise that a country could exist in the most volatile neighborhood on Earth and still keep its people safe behind a technological shield. That symbol cracked this week. And when symbols break, the reality they were holding together becomes far more dangerous than anyone planned for.